This is how codependent people think they resolve all their emotional pain through relationships, and this is how emotional independence actually is achieved. In today's episode, you will understand what codependency actually is, how it is connected with complex trauma, which shocking role narcissists play in that connection, and why in particular highly sensitive people are affected by it. A lot to talk about today, but I believe that the solutions we will discuss in the end can be a real eye-opener for you today. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert, and today we will talk about the relationship between codependency, complex trauma in highly sensitive individuals, and the shocking link with narcissism. And the disclaimer up front, I'm not a health professional, and the contents in this video are not to be understood as therapeutic medical instructions or advice. Everything I say here is based on research, my work with therapists, or personal experience. And also I want to remind yourself, if you want to listen to this episode as a full audio version, you can just go to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or here on YouTube, wherever your favorite podcast platform is. All the links through the resources to the podcast you find in the description below. Let's start with the definitions and what codependency actually is. And we have some official definitions here. Codependency is a term, on the one hand, which comes from psychology, and codependency is a therapy that attempts to explain imbalanced relationships where one person enables another person's self-destructive behavior, such as addiction, poor mental health, immaturity, irresponsibility, or underachievement. Definitions of codependency vary, but typically include high self-sacrifice, a focus on other person's needs, suppression of one's own emotions, and attempts to control or fix other people's problems. Also important is that codependency is not an established diagnosis, like for example, complex trauma or autism spectrum disorder. The term originates from addiction research, and codependency actually feels, and we will see that in the upcoming episode now, like a strong addiction to another person. Alcohol and drugs are definitely addictive, but, and that is the interesting part, a relationship can be even more, which then messes up your life. Basically, if you long for closeness, for intimacy, to fill a hole within yourself, then you're coming from a point of deficiency here. Codependency is also part of complex trauma. We will discuss that as well in this episode. And codependency has to be seen as a spectrum. Same is true for ADHD, for autism, for high sensitivity. We talked about that a lot. What is a spectrum? A spectrum of codependency shows up as that there is some kind of severe codependency, which is on the one hand of the spectrum, and on the other hand of the spectrum, there is mild codependency. Many people might be somewhere on that spectrum, somewhere on the mild side, somewhere on the severe side. When you are on the mild side, symptoms or problems, challenges within your relationships show up occasionally. When you're on the severe side, you will face regular upcoming challenges within your relationships, or your relationships do not work at all. If you're a highly sensitive person and have trauma wounds, then you are definitely somewhere on that spectrum. Then let's talk about the definition of complex trauma here real quick. Complex trauma, we defined that in the previous episodes a lot. For example, in the CPTSD episode about complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And complex trauma is what Gabor Mate says is not the bad things that happen to you, but it's the good things that didn't happen that should have. So the causes for complex trauma are therefore, for example, neglecting certain needs in childhood, emotional needs most of the time, neglecting attention, love, acceptance, being seen, being heard, freedom to experience all the emotions. If you experience that as a child, that might also come up in different adult scenarios within your relationships. So the role of codependency in relationships is definitely an important one. Complex trauma expert Tim Fletcher has a great series on codependency as well, which I watched before doing this episode, so there is a lot of great research within it. I will definitely link that to you below this episode. And when we have all these different subjects here, we have codependency linked to complex trauma within a constellation of a neurodivergent nervous system, of a super sensitive nervous system, then some problems will occur here for sure. So if you enter a relationship when you are in that construct, with that set of beliefs you installed within your identity when you were a child, then I can give you a certificate with 100% guarantee here that within that relationship you will definitely get hurt. And that will definitely result in an unhealthy relationship of some kind where you will get wounded over and over again. And if you experienced that before, you might know that it will be really painful, that it can be really painful. I also experienced that a lot. I still experience that from time to time. When you are in such a relationship, somewhere on that spectrum of codependency, you can see that as two people, so you and your partner, who are trying to solve each other's problems and challenges and try to meet each other's needs, on the one hand regarding your self-esteem, on the other hand regarding your emotional level. What's important to understand here is that those needs on whatever level can never be met by the other person because of the deep traumatic wounds. So it's like a devil's cycle with upcoming pain and hurt, with repetitive feelings of pain which trigger your wounds over and over again. Now, what happens here, as we talked about in the definition of codependency, is that one person becomes the other person's enabler of unhealthy behavior, right? So one person most of the times make the other person feel immature and behave immature and, for example, also irresponsible, and brings up, let's say, bad qualities of that person, holds them down. What happens here as well is that a classic parent-child-like relationship type forms here. Maybe you've also experienced that you might feel like a mom or a dad within your relationship, or you might feel like a child, like a son or a daughter, and your partner is your mom or dad. This can also vary within different relationships, depending on your partner, which can also, which is pretty interesting, vary within one relationship. So during one phase of the relationship, you feel more like the parent part. During another phase of that same relationship, you feel more like the child part. Next thing is that the enabler then reacts on the unhealthy behaviors of the partner, tries to solve the other person's problems and trying to meet their needs constantly, and therefore losing, and that's very important now, losing track on their own problems and needs. People pleasers, for example, are also created in these specific situations. So if you have challenges in your life with being a people pleaser or with attracting people pleasers, this might be a reason for it. Now, a really, really important part of that whole dynamic, as Tim Fletcher said in his video, many people do not think about that component in that specific scenario, is the component of narcissism within the complex trauma here. Now, Tim Fletcher says that complex trauma happens in toxic family systems where the person with the most power is the narcissist. So I think if you translate that, not every family system has probably a diagnosed narcissist within, but I think that most of the times there is someone, and that is what I agree on, some person in the family which constantly is expressing her or his own needs and emotions and making him or herself the center of that family system while suppressing needs and emotions of the other people, making them feel shame and guilt. Now, the narcissist definitely wants everyone to respond to their needs and emotions, and while making themselves the center of the family system, the narcissist in this scenario abuses emotionally, most of the times, other family members if they do not do what she or he wants. Now, being a highly sensitive person or a neurodivergent person, someone with a sensory processing sensitivity, someone with autism spectrum disorder, or someone with ADHD or a similar condition, on top of all that, within that toxic family system, there is probably no other option than getting traumatized and losing track of your own emotions, needs, and therefore somehow getting a distorted sense of self. Now, this is also because highly sensitive people and neurodivergents often have an especially high sense of empathy, plus highly sensitive people are super susceptible for narcissistic abuse. And we talked about that in a previous episode way back about narcissism and high sensitivity. And I want to recall the main point from that episode, which is how narcissists and sensitive people or empath are attracting each other like a magnet. Now here is an image of it. If you watch that as a video now, you can see that an image of a magnet which symbolizes the anti-receptive relationship between the narcissist and the highly sensitive empath. On the one side of that magnet, you have the narcissist, and the narcissist gratefully receives attention. The narcissist loves to express and be the center, and the narcissist longs for being listened and to be understood, while the highly sensitive part, the empath, is doing exactly the opposite, giving a lot of attention, also empathetically listening, and has a deep desire for understanding others. And this dynamic within those two parts is creating that what we call anti-receptive relationship. Now, this horseshoe-like magnet demonstrates how both expressions have their needs and characteristics that complement each other. So summarized and easily explained, highly sensitive people have a strong capacity for empathy and a deep desire for understanding. They are really good at putting themselves in other people's shoes and understanding them, and they give a lot of time and attention to others. Narcissists, on the other hand, seek exactly that. They gratefully receive attention, they gratefully receive praise and understanding. As you see that picture of that horseshoe from these two parts, that is technically the definition here of a codependent relationship, while the sensitive empath is the part who is kind of dying inside it. Right, let's discuss here a bit. What happens now if you do not break this cycle? If you're in it, whether you are the narcissistic part or whether you are the highly sensitive part, it is definitely, when you are in this type of dynamic, like an addiction, which gets gradually worse, and the partners, the two parts, get gradually sicker if you do not break that cycle. And the longer you stay in that cycle without breaking it, the worse it will get. Over time, you will become more and more addicted to the person on a really toxic level. You can also get used, that's really important one, you can also get used to that specific relationship type or style, which is in its core codependent, which is unhealthy and which is toxic for you, because it feels so normal to you, it feels so trustful for you, because you experience that so many times within your life. So healthy, non-toxic relationship where you were independent as well as your partner will feel so strange because you're not used to it, that it's difficult for you to break free from that. That's technically also the answer why you can choose otherwise. Again, because this type of relationship over time will be the only way which somehow feels right and familiar to you. So people who are in this dynamic and who learned this dynamic will try again and again and again to continue and repeat this style of relationship. Now, what I worked through in my first therapy within many sessions is what I call at some point the missing piece of the puzzle. This is some kind of image which was stuck within my head, and this is why I bring this up to this video here, because it's pretty relatable in this context. As I said in the beginning, when you are in a codependent relationship style, you have a distorted sense of identity. You might long for intimacy. This is the missing piece of the puzzle. Intimacy, closeness, someone or something who will make you feel seen, will make you feel heard, will make you feel loved. And this already starts in the beginning phase of a relationship where you feel infatuated, where you feel crazily attracted, like addicted already to a person you maybe barely know, but somehow you long for that intimacy and closeness with that person. I made a full episode about that. I'll link that to you up here, about infatuation and how to unmask that, what there actually happens beyond that dynamic. And that's pretty much the same dynamic which we see here in a codependent relationship style. Now you long for that missing puzzle piece, which is coming from the outside, and you wish that this missing puzzle piece might fill your emptiness inside. You're in need for that puzzle piece, and you might be, as I said, addicted from the beginning to some person who could give you this specific piece you long for so much, because your brain never thinks, I need to fix my inside. So what happens if your brain does not think about fixing your inside? Your brain wants to fix it from the outside, wants to get what it needs from other people. And this is exactly the point where codependency begins, because you're dependent to something or someone on the outside pretty much and pretty early already in an upcoming or forming relationship. And one hint up front here, this behavior will never really work. And I experienced that myself so many times within painful ways, that grabbing things from the outside, trying to fill my emptiness inside, will not make this emptiness go away and will not make myself fulfilled. What you're trying to attempt is to put a plaster, put a tape on your wound here. If you follow this journey and continue to be in this kind of dynamic, then the conclusion of that will be that you have to be within a relationship constantly to feel loved. This results in people who never can be alone, and in people who always need a partner who proves that they're lovable. People tend to be the one who rescues another person to get validation from rescuing and helping the other person, or people tend to be getting rescued because they want someone to care for them, which also some people might say someone is pretty needy, needs a lot of validation, and other people are too independent. They want to give validation to others. Now, let's discuss about the role of masking, hiding, and overadapting within those types of relationships. If you're someone who is masking, who is hiding some parts of their personality, or who is adapting to the behavior of the other person, then you might have within your mind that if you show your true self within the relationship you are in, then you do not get positive validation and love, and your partner might leave you because of that. Because in your head you think your partner just wants to be in a happy relationship. If I am happy, so my partner is happy. This is what's going on in your head. Also, if you're codependent, you also only can be happy if your partner is happy as well. So you are codependent on the mood of your partner. I also face that a lot within relationships. For example, when I sleep with a person in a room and I, for example, have to go to the bathroom at night, I am, within my head, afraid to wake them up. Why? Because it could make them upset, influence their mood, and therefore they might hate me for my behavior and then make me feel unloved. This is codependent behavior within relationships. Really small example here. But if you experience similar examples, definitely let me know in the comments if you like to share your personal stories. Always curious to hear them. Next point I want to talk about is the alert radar, aka hypervigilance. Hypervigilance in that construct of codependency means that the person who's codependent is constantly checking on the other person to see if the other person is happy. As I said, you only can be happy if the other person is happy. So what do? You constantly check the mood of the other person. It feels like you installed a feedback mechanism within your head, some kind of radar to constantly check the moods within your environment, of your partner, of your friends, of your family members. Now, the problem which appears here is if you're constantly being aware of the other person's needs and emotions, it's not just super exhausting and drains you and sucks out your energy, but it also makes you losing track of your own emotions and needs. Now, what happens is technically your identity becomes a reflection of the other person's identity, because you are just within your head, you're just constantly thinking about the other person, the other person's mood, the other person's emotions, the other person's needs, and what happens when you do not have them on your radar, and therefore you lose track of your own emotions and needs and lose track of your own identity. Now, what comes into play next is the topic of complex trauma and toxic shame and guilt. And I want to talk about that toxic cycle of shame and guilt in the next upcoming episode as well in more depth. The biggest damage which happens here is summarized that the identity in the beginning of the life, so of the child, is distorted, and later the identity of the adult is still distorted. Why is that? Because the child early on learned that there is something wrong with it. The child learns that it's all their fault. Whatever they did, they get this response from the most scenarios narcissistic part of the family system. It's your fault. It's your fault that you have needs. It's your fault that you express emotions. It's your fault that you do not listen and see my specific emotions. Because in the child's mind, what's going on here is that it thinks, if I would be okay, mom or dad would not have neglected me. If my needs and emotions were okay, then they would have listened to them. I could have expressed them. But that was not the case. So, toxic shame and guilt are installed within their minds, and therefore, as Tim Fletcher says so accurately, I love that, create a dis-ease of the self. You are uneasy with yourself because you're constantly thinking, I did something wrong, there is something wrong with me, it's all my fault. Now, if you're constantly reflecting the other person's needs, what happens here is, now if you're constantly reflecting the other person's needs, what is happening here now? If you express one of your needs, if you show one of your emotions, you might guess it, you will feel guilty and ashamed just for showing your natural emotions and needs. But it can be even worse. Children with neglected needs don't even know how to feel these needs. This is why they push them away, because they learned early on, it's so bad that I even have these needs. It's so bad that I even have these emotions. So get rid of them, push them away. So if you're in that position as an adult where you already sense your emotions and you know which needs you have and which things you want to express, then that's already a really good thing, because you already created a sense of awareness here within your identity for your emotions and needs. Now, complex trauma is about the child feeling unsafe and alone, as we talked a lot about in the central nervous system episode about the polyvagal theory. So when no one cares about him or her, then the child will feel unsafe. So what is the strategy here of the child, which still many adults have these days, to stay safe physically and to keep its central nervous system within the ventral vagal relaxed state? The child needs to sacrifice expressing emotions, needs to sacrifice feeling its needs, and needs to sacrifice setting boundaries. Technically, the child does not talk, does not feel, does not trust at all, and still that thing will do that as a grown-up being, as an adult. Now again, to close that cycle, what will happen if you do not break that cycle? If you still behave like that child as an adult, you are not able to use all these very important skills, expressing emotions, needs, and setting boundaries within your relationships, and therefore are not able to attempt a healthy relationship. So, and remember that again, when you are within such a relationship and you or your partner has this behavior, the person is not doing that, is not suppressing emotions, needs, and not setting boundaries because the person wants to upset you, or the person is not loving you or wants to hurt you. No, the person is doing that because he or she feels unloved and feels alone and is therefore afraid or ashamed and feels guilty of doing so. This is the moment where we come also to the solutions part, because there are obviously solutions and possibilities, opportunities to break that cycle within, especially the feelings of toxic shame and guilt, and also before. Now, if you identify with all of these concepts, maybe you are a highly sensitive person, a neurodivergent person in general, you identify as being wounded, maybe as being codependent here, then your job is to break free from that cycle, to not pass it to future generations, to our children, for example. I want to make that clear again. If you identify as having these kind of challenges, you're definitely not alone, so keep calm. For example, I'm also affected. Many people here in this community who comment regularly on my videos, which I'm pretty thankful for, by the way, are also facing these kinds of challenges. Important definitely is that wounds within ourselves do not heal if they're ignored. So the first step is always, and I said that so many times, to create awareness for these wounds. And the more sensitive you are, the more access you have to your feelings from deep inside and from early on. You already saw the solution pretty much in the beginning of the video, but I want to repeat that and now get more into depth with it. I think the solution is definitely to become more independent, to love yourself. Really important. If you love yourself, you are able to express your emotions and needs without shame and guilt. You are setting clear boundaries over time. And I'm so much aware of it that it's easier said than done, especially for us sensitive people. And I also face these challenges from time to time, and I know that it is crazily exhausting and crazily difficult to break free from that cycle. There are people here on this channel who are 50, 60, 70 years old who still face these challenges, which is fine, but it's important to constantly try to make tiny steps to break free from all of that. Now, what's always a good thing, which might give you also some sense of hope, is my first therapist, she said and made clear that especially sensitive people have that gift that we are very, very close to our own emotions and needs from a natural perspective. So we are born with that ability to address emotions and needs and to feel our clear boundaries. But if we are within, for example, a codependent relationship here, we have to learn to spend more time listening to what we feel and need, because we push it away for so many years and never address these emotions and needs. We also have to learn, and you guess it, setting boundaries. You are not responsible for others. Again, easier said than done, I know. You are not a victim. You are free and you can decide and take responsibility for your own emotions and needs. Sometimes, and maybe you also have that, I have to look straight in the mirror as well, just to remind myself that I'm a full grown up now. And that's especially true when we are with other people where we might be codependent to, whether we have mild or severe codependence here. I definitely recommend working with a healthcare professional, like a professional therapist in any case. It helped me a lot. And what's also important for relationship-related subjects like this one, like codependency, it's super helpful to have a partner. If you do not have a partner now, you can also work on your codependent behaviors within close relationships, with friends, for example. What helped me in the past and what helps me still is to step by step take off the mask and show my true and vulnerable emotions to my partner. Crazily difficult, but on the other hand, really relieving and healing. Everyone I talk to about this topic, here on the channel for example, says the same thing. It takes years and years, and maybe you need baby steps, but it's definitely possible. For one person only might take a couple months to realize it, couple weeks to break free from this cycle of codependency. Maybe that motivates you as well. Maybe you do not need years. Other people might need decades. We are all different, but I think what's pretty important here is that at whatever point you're standing now, what's always a good signal is if you make baby steps continuously. This is the way to break free from all that. And some final thoughts from my side about the whole topic. I'm always fascinated how codependency actually works within us and how strong these emotions can be. And when I look in the mirror and I see a free and grown-up man, but inside I sometimes feel like a chained, dependent and alert child, it's crazy and fascinating at the same time how this brain machine up here works sometimes. But the more often I circle back to my own needs and emotions, the more often I express them, the more I lose the sense of shame and guilt around it and feel this healthy sense of self within myself again. But now I'm also curious about your experiences with codependency. What do you think about the whole topic? Definitely let me know in the comments below this episode. And if you want to support my work and the podcast here, share the episode with friends and families, give it a like, rate it 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so more people can find it online. And I see and speak to you in the next episode. Have a great day.